Telecast.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby and welcome to another telecast. What IP and genres perform the best on YouTube? When's the best time to post new content and does it matter? And how do you reach your target audience with your content? Well, here to answer all that and more besides, we have Ally Penelope with some more strategy tips for broadcasters and studios from our friends at Little Dot Studios. They're one of the world's biggest YouTube channel specialists, running over 700 channels for some of the biggest sports and entertainment brands in the world. Welcome to Telecast, Ally.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Thank you for being here. And it's been great. The last few weeks we've had James Loveridge on the show from Little Dot Studios, and he talked to us about YouTube strategies for TV producers. And then we've also had Graham Swallow, who was talking us through a little bit more detail about optimization tips and metadata and all that stuff. So we got really into the detail of that a few weeks ago. So we're going to be talking about multi-channel strategies for broadcasters, IP owners, studios, etc. Anybody who may have multiple channels on YouTube or may be thinking about putting their content out across multiple channels. So first of all, tell us about your role at Little Dot, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a partnerships director. My boss is actually James Loveridge. So I work with him in our entertainment department on a number of different clients. So I know he mentioned the Graham Norton show. I work also with Hot Sauce, which does the Jonathan Ross show. But I also work with a number of studios and IP holders that employ that exact strategy we're going to talk about, where they're across multiple channels, multiple platforms, and how they can maximize that IP across those platforms. Okay.
And so you're working with big companies, but we're talking about big studios, aren't we?
Yes, big studios. We won't name names, but multiple IP and IP across different genre, IP that might be scripted or unscripted. So it kind of runs the gamut.
Okay, and they may be UK or they may be US based, who knows? But we can't talk about who they are in detail. But it's going to be brilliant to talk about the strategies that you're adopting and you're implementing from them as you manage all of their channels. So we've got 5 tips, right? Or you have 5 tips for us for multi-channel strategies for broadcasters, IP owners, and studios. So the first one we have here is called the pyramid approach. Now, tell us, Ally, what the pyramid approach is.
Yeah, so I don't want to confuse this with anything like a pyramid scheme. So I might just try to explain. So I think it depends on where you're kind of starting out, but let's assume that you already have all this great IP. But you're not exactly sure what's going to resonate with what kind of audiences, and you want to test and learn. So we'd recommend a marquee channel that sits at the top of the pyramid, whether that's your actual name of your company or whatever it might be. It could be a made-up brand, but it houses all the different IPs, and there you can test and learn. And you can start to get an understanding of what IPs are most popular, what genres might be most popular. And then from there, you can start to spin out your channels into the second and third layers of the pyramid. So the second layer would be genre-based. So there you could have, say, if it's film IP, it might be horror, it might be action, it might be Western, whatever it might be. It might be unscripted. It could be that simple. And then from there, you can really determine, okay, but what are the most important IPs? What are the specific shows that are resonating with people and have a big audience? And then you can kind of spin out that third and final bottom of the pyramid and make show-specific channels. Now, I think I did say this is sort of like a pyramid, but you could also think about it like a wheel, let's say. So perhaps you have that big marquee channel right at the center, and then you can kind of build spokes off that wheel. Some might be bigger than others. Some might be have greater revenue potential than others. But I think the key thing here is that test and learn approach. You might find that down the line, some channels long term don't work, and you want to dormant them and pivot in a different direction. But I think that's another key that we'll talk about in a little bit, is experimenting as well.
So imagine I am a big Hollywood studio and I'm monetizing my content, through the regular ways that channels do. So it may be, theatrical. They may have SVOD windows and all the other windows that they have. They may also be employing fast channels as well. So typically the clients that you have, they are looking presumably at YouTube for, as opposed to brand recognition, it's about driving revenue, right?
Sure. I think that's really another important part is what the core KPI is going to be. Yes, most of the time it's going to be revenue, but it might be brand awareness. It might be just audience generation or just trying to discover which type of audiences you might have. But typically it is revenue generative. So that also can inform the type of strategy that we employ. I know James spoke about it previously, but being able to lean into long form across your network is also incredibly important and lucrative for revenue generation.
And in your experience, then, are a lot of these major studios they're curious, presumably, about YouTube, and you must be, when you first speaking to them, you must be able to give them a bit of an idea about what sort of revenue they can generate, or give them projections. Surely that must be part of the initial process when you're speaking to them.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how present they already are on the platform. I think most people are on YouTube in some capacity now, and I also think, I've been with Little Dot now for 7 years, and when I first started this journey, a lot of broadcasters, a lot of studios did not want to be on the platform. They were worried about it cannibalizing linear views, theatrical views, etc. And I think the mindset has really shifted towards, it's a different space, it's a different location, and it also can be a completely different lucrative revenue stream for us. So in most cases, there's already some, visibility on the platform in some capacity. But what we can help with is identifying your audiences more specifically. So something we do, because we do digital rights management at Little Dot, is we're able to do what we call like a UGC traffic light. So we'll go out across the entire YouTube platform and we'll get a look at what UGC is being uploaded and just user-generated content. What from this rights holder's IP catalog is actually most popular.
Oh, and what's already out there
exactly.
that's been kind of illegally uploaded.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
That can be a huge indicator of which direction you should go in, because the people clearly want it. It's already up there, but they, might not be claiming it. They might not be making any revenue off of it. So that's a good place for us to start, is a traffic light document where we can determine, here's the things you should start with, here's the things you should lead with, because there's already huge viewing for those IP.
All right. Okay. So let's say we're that big studio that's moving into YouTube. It may have had one or two of its IP on channels already, but perhaps not really delivering what it expected to. The way you're approaching this is obviously the optimization tips that Graham talked to us about, really drilling down to those tips and actually experimenting and testing and learning, seeing what, and essentially taking it to the audience, mm-hmm. to the direct audience through metadata and what have you. So how long does that take then? So for example, I'm a big network. I have this amount of content, let's say, 1,000 hours. And I'm going to put that down onto YouTube as essentially, as you said, under one brand name channel. I'm going to start testing and learning across that. How long is it after you've optimized all of that content? How long will it take for you to really get some meaningful insights into, informing your strategy going forward?
Mm-hmm. It depends. But what I would say is, don't expect overnight success. I think YouTube is a mid to long-term game. And to really develop an audience, you have to have content actually uploaded onto your channel, well optimized, as you say. And then it's about the little tweaks, the little levers that you're pulling. And it can take up to 12 to 18 months to really grow a mature YouTube audience. I'm not saying it could take that long to necessarily spin off. You might start to see some IPs that are really popping that indicate to you, okay, this could deserve its own channel, or actually we could spin off and do this genre channel with a few of these different IPs that are in the, say, sitcom genre. But I think people think about YouTube as, I think because TikTok now or similar platforms, you can see success in such a short amount of time. But YouTube really can be a little bit of a longer game.
Yeah. And now let's not forget that YouTube is on TVs is hugely, becoming hugely popular, more so than Netflix. We've talked about that as a streaming platform. So let's talk about your second tip then. So using a marquee channel to test and learn to determine when to launch and expand that network? Talk us through that.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's say you have 50 IP and you obviously want to put out as much of them as possible on the marquee channel, but you still, you have to be mindful of how you're curating it. And then at some point you might start to recognize that one IP or another IP are starting to take off. And I think you just want to be mindful of the specific genres. So let's say you have 2 to 3 sitcom IPs that are really taking off. That might indicate that you could create a genre specifically for sitcoms. Or let's say it's specific type of sitcom, female-led sitcom, or 90s nostalgia sitcom, or what have you. And then you could spin off into that genre. And then from there, it might even be, okay, this one particular IP seems to have a really dedicated audience. We're going to spin off from that genre into a specific IP channel. And the timeline on that really depends. It could be anywhere, again, from like 3 all the way up to 18 months, depending on how popular your IP is to begin with, depending on how much of that IP you might have. Because another thing to think about is, do you have enough IP in a specific genre or a specific show to actually have a channel long-term, because you need to have enough content to sustain it.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider. And I think also, especially for rights holders who might have a smaller catalog, these genre hubs, this marquee hub is actually a great place where they can house programs that might only have, say, 5 or 6 episodes in a series amongst other shows like them, and give them an opportunity to thrive on the platform.
Well, can you give us an indication then of how many hours you need for a channel then?
For a channel itself, for a single channel, I would say probably, I mean, as much as you can get, definitely, but a minimum of, say, 50 hours.
Okay.
Because you really want to be able to nourish the algorithm, nourish the channel with consistent uploading. And if you're not able to do that, your channel's probably not going to succeed long-term in the algorithm. And you could get creative, of course. There's clipping, there's full-length episodic content, there's compilations, there's shorts, there's live streaming. There's lots of ways to maximize your IP, no matter how big the catalog might be. But it's definitely something to be mindful of. If it's smaller, think before launching a channel for a show that only has 6 episodes. You know, that's not sustainable. Maybe it needs to sit with a genre hub of detective shows or what have you.
And how would you know then to make that decision? Because I think let's just follow that for a second. So I've got a particular show which I have 100 hours for example, let's say, and it's performing well within my overall channel brand. And I decide maybe it is time to spin it off onto its own channel. What will determine that? Not only obviously the number of hours you've got, but is it watch time, or is it the number of subscribers that it's driving to the main channel? What is it, the key metric that you decide, we should launch our own channel now?
Sure. I think, again, it's going to be dependent upon KPI, but primarily in most cases, it will be watch time. Is it driving watch time? And is it driving revenue? Again, you might have a show that's hugely popular, but gets easily demonetized. So it just doesn't make sense to spin it off into its own channel. But I would say if it's monetizing well, if you have viewer retention, so you know people are not just clicking on it, but sticking around and watching it for a long time, views can be a good indication. Subscribers, not so much, because YouTube is a search engine and most of your viewership is going to be coming from non-subscribers anyway. So you're going to want to try to hit people who are looking for similar content on the platform. So I think it's a little bit art, it's a little bit science, because in terms of a benchmark to say at what number, is it 100 million views? Is it 100,000 hours? There isn't really that. I think it's going to be relative to the size of your, again, what you expect within your existing audience. But let's say maybe, gosh, I don't want to just pull a number out of the air, because I think it's going to be really relative. I think if you're seeing good traction for a sustained period of time on your marquee channel, you think there's growth, you think you have enough, then it's time to spin off.
Yeah, and you can also see how other similar channels are performing. So you get an idea of, what those forecasts for revenue might be in a year's time, for example, that will determine that as well.
Exactly. You could look at similar content on the platform and see how it's performing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another good point to highlight, that it's not all about subscribers, right? It's and subscribers is becoming much less important. It's all about the watch time, isn't it? And how long people are sticking around on your channel and watching your content.
Yeah, subscribers are a nice vanity metric, as we call them. They get you a shiny button that you can hang on the wall. But in terms of actually bringing in the viewership and bringing in the revenue, it's going to be about non-subscribers, because YouTube is a search engine at the end of the day. We think of it as a social media platform, and it kind of is. But really, it is a search engine. It's driven by how well you optimize your content. And so that's why having a multi-channel strategy approach can be so lucrative, because you can have the same piece of content across multiple channels. So let's say you have a really popular IP, you host it on your marquee channel, you host it on the respective genre channel, maybe even multiple genre channels if you have a big enough network. And it also has its own IP channel. And it could be the same content or very similar content. You're optimizing it slightly differently. You're hitting completely different audiences, because how many people are watching YouTube? But how many people overlap between those audiences? Not a lot. And so actually, it's a much more lucrative way to get that IP out there and to reach all different kinds of audiences.
So there's two things there that are really interesting. So if you're duplicating content, so if your content lives on your main channel, then you decide to start a sitcom channel, and you're also going to place your content on that sitcom channel. Does YouTube understand that you've got two pieces of content that are the same? Because presumably you might be optimizing that new show, or that same show on your new channel. You might be optimizing that in a slightly different way to target a different or more specific audience. Does that matter to YouTube at all?
YouTube doesn't mind if the actual video asset is the same. No. It's about how you optimize that content best. And it's also something to consider as well as part of the strategic approach is how and when you release that content. So you wouldn't want to release the same exact video across two channels, even if they have different optimizations on the same day, because you're just not doing yourself a favor.
Yeah.
Give that piece of content the best chance to thrive on the platform. Some people in the network team, because we employ this method with our owned and operated network, call it waterfalling, where we release a piece of content on one channel and then we have a window before we release it on another. Now, what that window looks like is something that we actively test and learn at Little Dot. We're always constantly analyzing the data to try to best understand what the optimal peak period is before you're able to publish something on another channel to get the maximum benefits and not cannibalize views. In general, we find it peaks at 30 days, but that can really vary from client to client. So again, it's something that we are able to investigate more deeply when we work with a client across multiple channels.
Right. Okay. So let's stick with this new channel that we've launched, this sitcom channel with 50 or 100 hours, for example. So this is not about putting all of that content out to begin with. It's like, let's optimize 50 different hours of video and then stick it up automatically at the same time. Is this about building a regular date where you go live, a particular time, as you say, which is really important, but maybe a particular day of the week as well, and start to build in some sort of viewer habits?
Yeah, I know that we've sort of spoken about how subscribers aren't as important, but I still think for the algorithm, that consistency and that same day, same time can be really important, because the algorithm will pick up on that. I don't recommend when you're launching a channel to dump like 50 hours worth of content there. I know it can be tempting because you think if people come to my channel and there's nothing there, that's also frustrating. But that's why I'm talking about the slow build. Because if you suddenly dump 50 videos, none of them are going to do well.
No.
So it's about launching and strategically and consistently putting content out at the same time, the same day, ideally. Although that's, again, something we test and learn and really depends on the audiences you're trying to reach. We say, this is a very general rule of thumb, but we tend to publish around 5 p.m. GMT because you can hit a North American audience, you hit the audience here and Western Europe. But that's, of course, if you're trying to target high RPM territories, English language territories. So it might vary depending on
so
your
high
audience.
RPM, tell us what you mean by
that. High revenue per mil. So it's revenue per 1,000 views on YouTube. And English language territories tend to yield a higher RPM, which therefore generates more revenue for a video because advertisers want to put their ads against English language speakers. So the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia all tend to be the territories where we see the most revenue generation for our clients.
Okay. And so we're talking about taking hopefully our subscribers and our community and building that on a journey with maybe a weekly upload of a new show. Are we also talking about shorter form content to help promote every episode as well? Because obviously YouTube Shorts is there, and for clips under 1 minute, that can actually help generate interest in the main clip as well.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about length and format yet, and how that can play into this approach. And again, it kind of depends on your KPIs, because as I know it's been mentioned, long form is king for revenue. The longer, the better. And again, that long form revenue can be duplicated across all of the channels in your network. And it's very good for also building an older viewership. People are watching on connected TVs. Older audiences tend to watch longer content on YouTube, whereas shorts they're the ones reaching the younger viewers, but terrible for revenue generation.
Yeah.
Really good for engagement, can actually be really good to drive subscribers to your channel. But if revenue is a key driver, you don't want to rely on a strategy that's heavy on shorts.
And I suppose nobody's watching shorts on TV, are they? They're mainly on your phone, right?
No, YouTube does have a feature now called related video, where when you're watching a short, you can push it to a longer form piece of content, although we haven't seen a lot of conversion with that yet. So kind of jury's still out on whether or not that's a useful strategy. But I will say that even for those clients where revenue is a priority, I do think there's value in shorts, because I mean, shorts exist in their own feed, first and foremost. They're in the shorts feed on YouTube. As you say, people aren't watching them on TVs. They're going to be separate from other in-feed videos. And YouTube still pushes them in their algorithm. They want them to be successful. So I think a strategy that kind of straddles all the different formats is actually most beneficial. But I would, again, lean into long form and longer form pieces of content if revenue is the key driver.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about launching every week around about the same time, just to build that habit and that viewing habit, and send out messages to the YouTube algorithm that there's new fresh content coming every week, which is something that it likes. Okay. So how about the next tip? So that tip was about don't be afraid to duplicate content, right? Because that we can use same content on our hub channel, but also on our original new channel as well. So it takes time is your fourth tip, which you've mentioned already. So it's the long game, isn't it, that we're playing here?
It is the long game. And I think that can be a frustrating thing for some people to hear, especially at this point where a lot of studios and streamers and the like have already started to kind of build these empires on YouTube. I think a lot of people who are new to the game think, I need to race to catch up to where people are at. But unfortunately, I do think, or not unfortunately, I think it's just a case of, if you really want to build a strong network that's going to meet all of your KPIs, you have to do it with, care and consideration, and be willing to experiment and, dig into the data. And you can't just throw up a bunch of stuff or start to launch. I wouldn't recommend launching, rather than trying the wheel approach and starting to build out slowly based on data. I wouldn't recommend just launching 20 channels and hoping for the best, unless you just want to burn through resource.
Yeah.
It's just, a lot of them will flop.
Well, that's the other thing, is that there's two things there, aren't there? It's the long game. We're playing the long game, and you do need to invest in learning those skills, and the skills that Graham talked about a couple of weeks ago, in terms of, optimizing every single piece of content to make it more attractive to the YouTube algorithm as we go on, and also, and to help it get discovered. But also it's about building for the future. YouTube is growing and growing and growing still, and becoming ever more popular and more powerful. Mm-hmm. So it's really about, thinking where you're going to be in a year's time, 2 years' time, not necessarily just for that piece of content, but it's also strategically, perhaps for a company that is a big IP owner, really thinking of where things are going to be in 2-3 years' time. That's
a really good point too, because I think there's a lot of IP holders that surely ones that we work with, that, might have theatrical releases. And if they've built this amazing network, they can leverage that, so they might have a release that's, again, I'm going to say horror film because I'm a horror enthusiast myself, but they put it out on, they can support it on the horror network that they've built, or the marquee channel as well. So there's multiple places, non-traditional spaces, where they can then leverage that theatrical release and also make some money doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's a little bit about patience and learning the skills. And then finally, we come on to your tip, which is serving different audiences. Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think this is a good one as well, because oftentimes, especially big rights holders, they have a lot of different considerations when it comes to the audiences that they want to hit. And YouTube pretty much has all those audiences there. It's just about, again, pulling those levers and tweaking the optimization to make sure that you're hitting them. And in theory, you could be building out a network that has channels servicing those different types of audiences. So what I mean is, it might be that you have, say, a bunch of different kind of sitcom content. Let's keep going back to sitcoms. And some of them are resonating with a younger audience, say Gen Z, young millennials. So you can create a genre-based channel specifically with those IPs, are resonating with those folks. You're optimizing the content specifically for that audience and reaching them there. And then you have the sitcoms that might be for the older audiences, the Gen Xers, the baby boomers, et cetera. And you're packaging those on a separate sitcom genre hub that's servicing those older audiences. So I think that's what's so great, is that you're able to really curate your IP catalog to service whoever it might be. And again, I think this is something that you can't just do from the get-go. It takes time to kind of even understand what audiences you might have. I think sometimes what happens with us, with a lot of our clients, is we start to develop this network of channels, and there's always surprises about what IPs are resonating people and what IPs are resonating with which people. And until you do that experimentation, you might not know.
Yeah. And we're coming back to an earlier point that you made about English-speaking territories, which automatically, I think a lot of people a lot of companies are looking to target. But how about dubbing then? And how about bringing all of this content to new audiences? Because we've got lots of different AI tools that are being built now. So it starts to become much more affordable from a YouTube perspective to target various different audiences in India, for example, or Nordic markets in their domestic languages. So tell us about how you're approaching language and dubbing then.
Well, I'll go back and say there's two schools of thought with us, because there is the MLA tool, which is relatively new to MLA tool, which is relatively new to the platform. So that's the multi-language audio tool. And you might be familiar with, say, Mr. Beast is using it. He previously had all of his foreign language channels separately from his main one, but he's now dormanted all of those, and he's using the multi-language audio tool on his main channel, which means he's able to have dubbed tracks on all of his videos and subtitles on all of his one single upload.
Are we talking, is that automatically dubbing them, or is he actually uploading different dubs for each language?
He goes away and he has actors who create those dubs for him for all those different languages. So similarly, if you had, say, in this case, like a theatrical studio, they would have to provide the dub versions or the sub versions of those audio tracks.
Okay.
So you could use the MLA tool, which is, again, relatively new, and we're still gathering data internally about how successfully it's able to reach audiences in those different territories. Our data does heavily suggest that it's not entirely effective without metadata alongside of it. So you'd also want to have someone who is able to translate and write all of the metadata.
Well, that was going to be my question, actually, because we've talked about how important it is to optimize content. Yeah. So if all of a sudden we are uploading a dubbed audio track, then into the same, essentially on the same video, which is hosted in the same place on YouTube, then wouldn't you also need to upload international language metadata?
Yes. And then in theory, it's served whatever the user is logged into, the language that they've chosen is how that metadata will appear to them if it is available. So in theory, if someone in Thailand is logged in as a Thai user, then that metadata will be served to them in Thai, as long as you have Thai metadata written and they can select the Thai dub.
But at the moment, they can only do that if you're creating different videos with different language metadata.
Yes. So it's a bit complicated. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is that's a lot of resource. And you obviously need to either, resource out native speakers for all of this or have that resource in-house. And in fairness, at Little Dot, we do have a lot of speakers for lots of different languages. So we always have Spanish, Italian, French language speakers readily available, which is really beneficial for us.
Part of your team, you're such a big team, right? So you have around 600 team members, don't you?
Our department is 120, but my team alone is 30 to service a few different clients.
Right.
And we do deal with a few different foreign language accounts as well. And I think it's a lot of resource. So it's something to consider about what the actual reach is going to be. And again, jury's still out about whether or not that's actually lucrative for most clients. I think the truth is probably there's somewhere in the middle. It's not get dubs for 10 different languages across the country. It's probably, okay, maybe Spanish is the one language that actually does have a lucrative audience, and maybe you should consider doing it with just that language. I said it was two schools of thought earlier because there is the MLA tool where you just have to have a single channel and you can upload the different audio tracks to the one upload. But historically, what we've done, not just at Little Dot, but I think, lots of people have done this across YouTube, is to actually launch localized language channels specifically, which obviously you can imagine that, again, the resource there is very heavy because there you're actually creating different uploads, uploading them to all the channels.
Doubling your resource, aren't you, on one channel? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think for us, to be honest, those have been more successful than the MLA tool.
Right.
I
so
think
it might actually be worth it. It might be worth it, depending on what the content is and the potential that you're seeing for that content. That might be something that you will advise a client to say, we would suggest you create a domestic YouTube foreign language channel for this particular market.
Yes. But again, I think that comes down to how lucrative you think that market might be, how big of an audience in that market. Again, this tends to be Latin America. We do some stuff with Nordics, for example, but some of them are always going to be very small. So I guess it just, again, depends on what the gameplay is. If it's going to be for revenue, for example, India or a lot of Southeast Asia or Asian countries are always going to be low revenue generators. So it just depends on what your KPIs are, really.
Okay, Ally, that's fantastic. Really interesting insight there. It's not straightforward, this stuff, is it? But actually, the opportunity is incredible. I think to look at all these different ways to monetize and optimize your content and take it out to different audiences. It's there's a real opportunity for lots of studios and IP owners to do that right now.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a lot of effort, but it's worth the time, the resource. It's worth the experimentation, and it's something that could really pay off in the long term in terms of building a huge audience and also bringing in quite a bit of extra revenue as well.
All right. Well, that's what everybody's looking for today. Ally, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on Telecast.
Thank you.
Well, that's about it for this week's show. Telecast was produced by Spirit Studios and recorded in London. For more YouTube tips for TV producers and content creators, don't forget to subscribe to Telecast on YouTube. You can just hit the button below. We'll be back next week with a special show recorded at the Telecast Brand-Funded Entertainment Summit at Advertising Week Europe. Until then, stay safe.